Hey everybody, welcome as you're joining. My name is Max Gibbons. I'll be teaching today's class. We're going to wait about 1 more minute for people to continue to log on, and then we'll get started. Today's class is going to be on calligraffiti. I've been practicing calligraphy for a little while now, so I'm going to be able to kind of give you a background on myself and then about what we'll be learning today. Going to wait about 1 more minute for folks to join, and then we'll get started. Remember, you can add any comments into the chat box. I won't be able to hear or see you, I don't believe, but you'll be able to see me, see the screen that I'm sharing. And if you put any comments in the bottom, they'll come across a ticker that I'll be able to see, and I'll be able to look at them and answer them as well. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to get started. I know we've got a limited amount of time. We all got a lot of TV to watch tonight if you're going to watch the debates. So I'm going to share my screen, and just give me 1 second. All right. Can everybody see my screen? There we go. All right, so today's lesson is going to be on calligraffiti. I'll get into that term in a little bit, and I want to provide you with a slight background about who I am. So my name is Max Gibbons. I lived in DC for about 7 years, and now I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I have been interested in graffiti and lettering for just over, I'd say, 15 years. I got into graffiti when I was in high school, really interested in letter forms and the way that people were writing their names both illegally and legally on the streets. And then I got very interested in it and wanted to know more about it. The examples that you're seeing on this slide are some of my paintings. I usually try to, depending on the piece that I'm painting, these are murals, but I'll also work on paper and other mediums as well. I'll try to use either words or phrases or letters that relate to the neighborhood that I'm painting in. So the neon looking one with the centipede coming out of the wall on the right-hand side of your screen, I painted that for a few friends who live here in Brooklyn, and their names and the names of the people who live in that building and the community are in those circles of calligraphy. They're in those patterns. I used the letters themselves as a part of the design. And then the ones on your left, the one that is similar to the one on the right with the circular pattern, is the names of various people and song lyrics about Washington, D.C. that I painted at the Kennedy Center. And the top one was a mural that I recently painted in Soho, New York, after the murder of George Floyd and other people of color. So this is various people's names who have been the victims of police violence and misconduct over the years. And this was a mural that was installed during the height of everything that was going on in late June and early July. So I just wanted to put some things out there, some of the work that I've done, just to kind of ground you with that. And then I will get into what we'll be talking about today. So calligraffiti is a connection between the tagging that you might see on the streets, the way that graffiti writers have been putting their names out in public for almost 60 years now. Well, maybe 50 or 60, depends on who you talk to. And the traditional calligraphy, art of lettering that has been around since written language. So I'll be getting to that in a little bit, but that mesh of the words together, that combination of calligraphy and graffiti, is really about the art of writing. So it could be Japanese brush characters with a ink brush. This could be Arabic pictorial scripts, illustrated medieval manuscripts, whatever it is that creates letters in a very beautiful way. It could be legible, it could be illegible. When it comes to calligraffiti, it could be legal or abstract vandalism. It really spans a pretty wide. I do think that there is art in the letters, which is extremely important. And graffiti is all about that, right? It's about getting your name, your pseudonym out into the public, using those letters in a very artistic and individualistic way, and putting that often in an urban environment. So the fact that calligraffiti combines very traditional styles of writing with this more recent form of artwork being graffiti is what drew me into it originally. So for today, it's going to be mostly instruction, mostly an overview of this art form, but I do want you to try to practice a little bit. So if you have these supplies, fantastic. If not, that is not a problem either. We'll be going over this a little bit. Very simply, you need 2 pencils, some paper, wide markers, and a ruler. If you don't have these, once again, that's fine. Also, some tape or rubber bands are very helpful. I'll get into why that's important in a little bit, but I just wanted to put that out there. And also, if you need any resources or anything after this, I'm sure we at Words, Beats, and Life can talk to you. I love talking about this. I could go for hours and hours and hours. But let's talk about a little bit of background first. So for today's class, and traditionally in Western culture, the letters of the alphabet are Latin. They are referred to as Roman alphabet, A through Z. It's the most commonly used alphabet in the world. So the specific style of calligraphy over time has evolved within that alphabet. And we'll be focusing today on the black letter type of drawing, of writing letters, of calligraphy. As you can see here, this is an illustrated manuscript. You can see that there's a very stylistic form of the letters. There's a lot of uniformity throughout, spacing and height, etc. And calligraphy really roots itself in those very strict rules of how high or how low a letter can be, the width between letters and words. And that's the fun thing about calligraffiti, is you're taking a lot of those techniques and a lot of that learning and kind of flipping it on its head. Kind of how a DJ would take a beat and cut and sample from it. It's very similar when you're doing that with the letters. You're taking the parts of that traditional learning of calligraphy, and you're now applying it to a new type of art form. I think it's incredibly important to note that calligraphy happens with all written language. The person on the side of this screen, Hassan Masoudi, is one of the best calligraphers in the world. He is currently living in France, I believe. He's an Iraqi painter, and his lettering, while not calligraffiti, has very much influenced a lot of calligraffiti writers. Traditional calligraphy in the Islamic world, it does have very strict rules oftentimes, but being able to play with the shapes, being able to really be a tool for the expression of Islam, it's extremely characteristic in the religious form of that artwork. It's very similar to a Christian illustrated manuscript, like the Book of Kells or something along those lines. But certain artists in the Middle East have really gravitated towards calligraffiti in the past 10 years. So the traditional writing of calligraphy kind of meshed with let's say political statements, provocative statements, if you will. They were putting letters and artwork back into the streets where there may not have been so much beforehand. So during the Arab Spring, a lot of traditional artists were actually taking their artwork onto the walls, becoming calligraffiti writers, which is really interesting, combining once again that traditional art form with the more urban or the more explicit art form that then is on the streets, like graffiti. We'll be getting into another artist who was influenced by Hassan in a minute. Their name is El Cid, and I'll show you some examples of their work as well. So for today, we're going to be focusing on black letter. It's a very old version of calligraphy. It's also known as Gothic script, as you can see here on the title, used in the 12th century until about the 17th century, predominantly used in Western Europe. It was commonly used in the Danish language, in German, in Estonian writing, up until about the 1940s. It's also referred to as Old English. You might have seen. It's also used in like the New York Times font for their title, and other different album covers and things along those lines. There's a lot of different types of black letter, which I think is important. Just like there's lots of types of any type of writing or any type of style. So these include, but are not limited to, textura, Gothic, black letter, quadratica, and we'll be going to this in a little bit as well. I want to highlight on this slide the Nib Widths section of the slide. Oftentimes, as you are learning calligraphy, and as people who practice calligraphy, calligraphers are writing their letters, they'll have that guideline on the left-hand side that tells them how high or how low their letter should go, tells them the spacing between the letters as well. So for this example, there are 8 nib widths in height. So we're going to go into the details around tools in a little bit, but if I was practicing, I would take my tool, whether it is a chisel tip marker or a paintbrush or something along those lines that has a flat end to it, something like this, like a paintbrush, and I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the side, and that would give me the proportions and the height of the letters. Once again, you can see on here, oftentimes black letter, you would hold the pen at a specific angle to get those very even or perpendicular lines. In this case, it's a 45-degree angle. We'll be going to that in a little bit as well. And there's also very specific spacing on this example. Once again, the fun part of calligraphy and graffiti in general is playing with the letters. So you do not have to stick to this structure. I think that's important. Usually, you know, it adds uniformity to your letters. It makes them more legible. But if that's not what you're looking to do, that's totally fine as well. And I'll show some examples of how these rules are both followed and broken or expanded upon by a lot of current artists. I want to highlight this because this is an image of various wide-tipped markers, and you can see their different sizes. So if you've ever seen a wide, king-size pilot marker, you can see that nib width is almost, maybe a ½ inch. And you can use that almost as a chisel tip marker rather than a bullet pointed marker that has the rounded top, like most paint markers. The two markers on the right-hand side of the screen, the 3 and 4, are Uni-Wide markers. These were a staple of every graffiti writer's tool set back when they were more prominent. You could fill these with different types of ink. You could cut into the nib, the point of the marker, to make them more sharp or angular. And they would leave lines that were anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches across. So in a world where you are illegally putting your name or your moniker out on the street, being able to take up a lot of space with your tag, being able to get your name visibly out there was key. So a lot of writers would gravitate toward those more larger markers. I also want to note that for today's purposes, I'm also going to highlight the use of stickers in graffiti. This is a more relatively new phenomenon. Stickers can be carried in bulk. If you walk around any city, you may see them on street signs or newspaper boxes or on the backs of trucks or anything along those lines. But graffiti writers, like I was explaining before, they always modify their tools. Many will make their own inks, their own markers, combine different colors and different spray paint cans together. Back in the day before you could buy a lot of these supplies online or at your local art supply store, they would spend hours and hours and hours looking for different caps from different spray brands, whether it was their parents' hair spray or maybe the Pam can for oil, and they would try those on spray paint cans and mess around and play with that. So graffiti writers have also done that with stickers. And the use of stickers allows them to take their time, usually in the safety of their own home, really practice how to write their name in a way that they want to stylistically, and then they can go out and put those stickers on the street. I'm showing you these examples because, once again, you can see that these are United States mail stickers. So they're using a tool for a use that it was not originally intended. And I also show this because Faust is probably one of my favorite graffiti writers. They have gone on to do a lot of work, both professionally and on the streets. And I really appreciate how you can see the calligraphy in these tags. Once again, I really think there's an art to the tagging, and tagging is one of the building blocks of being a really good graffiti writer. I could go into this for a while, but you have a wide spectrum of ways to do graffiti. It could be using markers or paint rollers or spray paint, and you can choose to put your name up as a tag, a throw, which is usually a bubble letter of some sort, and a piece, which is a masterpiece, which is very colorful, oftentimes very complicated. There are also other ways, but that's kind of the basics. So I just wanted to go into this a little bit. Graffiti is about planning your letters and placing your letters and putting them out there. Stickers is a great way to practice for a lot of graffiti writers, and it's also relatively safe. A spray paint can makes noise when you're using it. It's kind of hard to hide that on your person, and stickers are very inconspicuous. You can put them up very quickly. The time that it takes someone to do a tag might be 30 seconds, but for a sticker, it takes less than 1 second. So I just really wanted to highlight that. They're very used, I will say. So this is just an example of a few other writers. Once you see Faust again there, and a few other ones by Shore and Twist. The bottom left of your screen, you can see how many stickers there are from one artist. They go by Baser, and you can see it's very hard to read, but also that might be the intent. So oftentimes when you're thinking about your calligraphy and you're thinking about your graffiti in general, the artwork that you're creating, do you want it to be legible? Do you want it to be harder to read? What are you trying to get across in the artwork that you're putting out there? I wanted to highlight this piece just because it is fantastic. This artist goes by the tag Batty Pinos. It's, if you didn't know that, it might be hard to read, but you can see the very stylized B in the beginning. You can see the A and the D have a very similar stroke. There's also uniformity to the letters throughout. And then there's also flourishes. There's some style there. It's a very simple, quote unquote tag, but there's so much expression. The O in the nose is now an eyeball with a crown, right? And that all comes from holding the pen in a very specific way that we'll be getting to in a second, on that 45-degree angle. So when you're taking your hand across a surface, whether it's a sticker or your page or a wall in this case with this tag, your pen width is changing as you're going along, which I find really interesting. I wanted to show you this piece. This is by a writer named Niels Schuh Muehlmann. Schuh is his graffiti name, and he's actually often credited with bringing the term calligraffiti to the forefront. He used that term in 2007 during a gallery show. He has a book called Calligraffiti, and he often describes the art form as traditional handwriting with a metropolitan attitude, which I kind of like. You're taking the traditional strokes, you can see the spacing here and the style of writing, but then adding the splatter and adding the less uniform, the overlapping strokes for the background. I think that's really beautiful. He does some incredible work. And he also helped form a group called the Calligraphy Masters, which is an evolving and ever-changing group of calligraphy artists from around the world. I think that's really cool because you can be anywhere and pick up this art form. You can have any materials and you can do this art form as long as you have something that can leave a mark on a surface, whether that's paper once again or a wall. You can do graffiti, you can do calligraffiti with any practice or with anything. It's great now because unlike the early days of graffiti where styles were extremely specific to geographic locations, which some people are upset that has kind of gone away. But also it allows for people who may not have access to an urban environment, or maybe they don't have access to people in the graffiti scene. They can go online, they can access these resources, these trainings, and they can learn for themselves, which I think is really powerful. I'll show you, this is the artist that I was referring to earlier. His name is El Cid. He's a French and Tunisian street artist who often incorporates very traditional Arabic styles and that Arabic calligraphy into his work. So since the 2011 Tunisian Revolution, looking back once again to that Arab Spring movement and being more active in the streets with artwork, he has consistently put work in the streets all around the world. I believe he won maybe an Oxfam Fellows grant a few years ago. It's just fantastic how his artwork has really blown up, and his artwork really demonstrates how that Islamic calligraphy style can be modernized to some degree with a graffiti aesthetic. I think this image really highlights that. This is a building that has been neglected. Maybe it's someone's home, maybe it's used for storing animals and livestock, but it was a very blank wall, crumbling concrete or stucco. And he approached a person in the community, asked if he could paint this piece on there, and then he did so. I think it's really incredible how once again, thinking about the size of a tag or the size of a mural, you can use those calligraphy strokes and then put your artwork out there, and it can make a surface, come to life in some sense. So once again, if you have any questions or anything along those lines, feel free to put them in the comments box. I'll be able to see them. But now we're going to get to the hands-on part of our talk today. I'm showing you this slide once again just because it highlights how different graffiti writers have used different tools. All of these are markers that once belonged to graffiti writers. You can see their names. I know it's a little small, but underneath each tool. So on the left-hand side, you have homemade markers. You can see that kiwi shoe polish bottle that's been cut and filled with different types of ink and made into a marker, right? On the right-hand side, you have various markers of different sizes and widths and traditional uses that were then used for graffiti and mark making. So in that spirit, today I want you, if you have a chisel tipped marker, if you have anything that has a broad edge to it, that's great. And if not, if you have two pencils, you can make something similar. So if you have two pencils and you combine them with some tape or maybe two rubber bands, you'll get the calligraphy tool that we're going to be talking about today. So it'll look something like this. You'll see the tips of the pencils are in line. So when you touch this to the page, both tips should hit and flow across at the same time. In doing so, you'll be able to create letters and follow the calligraphy steps that we're going to be talking through. If you don't, that's totally fine. You can use any marker that also has a wide tip, or a traditional paintbrush as well, a wide paintbrush, not one that is circular. So when I think about a marker like this, I know I'm in the small side of your screen, but you can see the tip is chiseled, excuse me. There you go. So without any further talk there, think about those height lines. So this is where the ruler comes in handy. If you don't have one, totally fine. But what you would do is take your marker or take your pencil tool, and you would create those little squares on the left-hand side. You would create 8 of those to give you the height of your letters. The main structure of the body of the letter is in the middle. In those 4, that's the baseline and the height. And then below that is your descender line. So the height for the ascenders, that's for letters like K or H or L. And then going below that baseline is for letters like G or Y, other letters that you want to stylize as well. So thinking through that and thinking about the shape of the black letter calligraphy that I was showing you earlier, the basic stroke that you want to practice, and once again, practice makes perfect. I can't tell you how many times I've drilled the following slide, but it's just focusing on pulling lines down in a very uniform manner. For our purposes, you will want to hold your pen or your marker or this fun tool at about a 45-degree angle. So if you think about a square, you're going at a perfect line, and you're going to be cutting down and pulling your lines. If you look at the dots on the right-hand side, those small serif strokes, we call them, they should be about 1 width of your pen across. So you're making perfect little diamonds, right? And most letters, once they're broken down, are going to be built out of these 3 strokes, those short ones, the middle ones that are longer, and then those serif kind of diamonds on the side. These are going to let you write letters that are extremely similar to each other. The letters, and I can include this later on, if you think about the letter C, very similar to the letter E. The letter O can look like a P as long as you add one of those longer strokes to it. Same with a Q. A T and an L, once again, they're the same. You just put it across the crossbar. So starting with these strokes, these vertical up and down strokes, get your hand, I guess, used to or acclimated to using that very repetitive motion. You can also go side to side, and that'll help with some other things as well. It's essentially lengthening those dots, those serifs. I want to show you as well, if you're using a marker, full pressure, your entire nib of your marker, that flat part, should be touching the page. That's how you get those perfectly uniform lines coming down like this. If you don't, and you use, put some more pressure on the left side or the right side, your line will patter out. It'll get a little like pockmarked down the way. Then again, that might be something that you're looking to do with the letters that you're creating. So the image on the bottom shows how, as you're pulling down that line, as you're practicing that stroke, if you start to leave off the pressure and you start to go from full to half to that edge, your line will cut off into that point. This can be really cool when you're making letters stylistically. You could have, a P that goes, into nothing, or you could have an L that goes up into a flourish. So it allows you to play with the width and the shape of those lines, which once again, I think is really important. That pressure manipulation of your pen or of your tool on the page, it could be your brush, it could be whatever, will allow you to have different thicknesses in your lines. These images are from a calligrapher named Jake Reynes. His website is extremely helpful. There are free tools and outlines which can be followed, which is really great. And a couple other helpful resources, including alphabets that you could print and trace, things along those lines. I'm going to continue. I just wanted to show this image. This is that graffiti writer Shu that I was talking about earlier. He makes images in that repeating stroke pattern. For these, you can see he started on the top, with the line going up and to the right, and then he pulls it down very straight, and then it goes up and to the right again to get that tail of each and every single stroke. And the uniformity itself shows a mastery over those strokes. He's putting about a half width of distance between each of those. So for our purposes and for the purposes of practice, let's say, I would suggest starting off with one full stroke between your letters, one full width of your marker or your paintbrush, or if you have the two pencils with that. And then you can start practicing once again making those letters. I wanted to show the following slide and actually practice with you for a second. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a minute, and then you can see me. I have a piece of paper behind me, and I also have my pad of paper here so we can practice. But I wanted to show you this example. I think it's most important to start with lowercase letters first. Uppercase can get pretty wild. It can get to be a lot of fun, but the lowercase letters allow you to really practice, right? So if you look at the letter B in this alphabet, you can see it's made up of essentially 3 pen strokes. The first, I guess 4 if you want to add the flourish, but the first is that long descending line for the base of the B, that stalk. Then there's the second line that comes off of it and then rounds the shape of the bottom. And then the third line that is pulled across to connect the two. If you look at the letter C, for example, you're starting with that one line going down first, and then you have a secondary line coming off the bottom, and you're going across, making that serif shape, that diamond once again, and then you pull your marker up with the pressure to give it that tail. And then the third line is giving that cone shape, the line on top of the C. Once again, if you look at that as just being a diamond, it's just that serif once again. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, and I will do so. I'll switch back to the screen share after this. So just give me 1 minute. Great. Okay, so you can see me. I have with me a couple different markers. I'm going to be using this one. It might be a little hard to see because of the distance, but I'll move and you should be able to see it. Also, I'm a righty, so it'll be happening on this side. But this is just a large magic marker. You can see when I take the cap off, it has that chisel tip to it. It is not bullet pointed. And that'll allow me to add and pressure to this point, so the whole thing is touching the paper when I'm writing. So let me just move my chair. We'll see if you can see this here. Okay, so I have lines already drawn on this piece of paper. You can't entirely see it, but I'm going to start with the letter, we'll start with the letter A. So I'll start here, and I have my pen with the pointed tip, the sharp tip, facing downwards, and then it gets smaller as it goes along. I'm holding this pen at a 45-degree angle, so when I go down, I'm going to get very thick, uniform lines. If you can see those. I know it's a little far away, but if I go this way, they're also the same thickness. You see my hand and the position that I'm holding the pen is not moving. Now, if I went in a 45-degree angle straight across, it's a thin line because I'm only allowing that front part of the marker to touch. So once again, if I went up, again following this, and I curve down, that's how you get that kind of shape. Your 45-degree angle allows the pen stroke to actually change in width and create those types of shapes. So for our purposes, I'm going to make a line going down for the A. I'm going to add a serif going to the right-hand side, just a little diamond going this way. I can add another from the top of this line going this way, and then I'll pull down again. Now I have an O. Add another serif. Now I have an A. If you took this away and I added a line here, you would have a B. You can see there's a lot of letters that have a very similar shape when you're thinking about writing them in this traditional calligraphy style. Once again, this could be an H right now. You know, this long one could have been an L. A lot of the letters have a very similar structure, and once you start to practice those strokes and you can see how they all fit together, that's how you start to create your own letters. The fun thing about calligraffiti is you don't have to follow these exactly. Also, if you look, I have just about one pen width in between these letters, so that just takes some time. And another fun thing is you don't have to be as rigid. So the traditional fractal or black letter calligraphy has those very angular, very sharp lines to them. So now let me try an A, holding the pen the same way, but trying to be a little bit more soft with a line. You can see, and I'll do it on a piece of paper so you can see it a little bit closer. I've drawn these 8 guidelines here. I'm going to be using a slightly smaller tool to show you. This is a Pilot Parallel pen. You can fill them with various types of ink, and you can see, if I can find the camera, it has a very narrow nib to it, that metal nib. You can see it's almost see-through going on the side, and then you have your wide part here. So using the guideline like we had discussed earlier, I'm going to hold my pen to the paper with the entire thing touching, and I'm going to pull down in one stroke. So let me see if I can do that for you. There you go. Now if I add a little bit to it, and I start almost trying to make an S pattern, I'll get a stroke that looks something like this. I'm sorry that you can't see that, but I will show you. So you can see that 45-degree angle of holding the marker allows it to be very skinny at the top, cutting to the side, pulling down in the fashion that lets the entire nib of the marker touch the paper. And then on the bottom, I'm going the opposite direction and making that shape. So I'm going to do that on the wall behind me. I'm going to use black so it sets it apart from what we were doing earlier. And I'm going to make a similar marker stroke to this. I'll also start with the letter A. So starting here, I'm going to make that S shape. Instead of doing a hard serif here in a box, in a diamond shape, I'm going to pull up towards the end. I'm going to do the same thing here. And then here, I'm going to bring this down and give it a tail. So you can see a lowercase a. There's also various ways to write these letters. If you think about the text options in Microsoft Word, or if you've ever played around with typography or any font websites, there's various ways to write the same letters. So thinking about an A being something like that, or maybe even something like this, more rounded, bring it down, right? So there's all different ways to make these letters, but regardless, I'm trying to hold my pen at that same 45-degree angle to make any one of these. I could add something like that for a lowercase a. There's tons of ways to do this. And you can also make them as small or as wide or as tall as you want to, similar to how graffiti writers, change their lettering. They change their mark depending on the surface that they're writing on or the tool that they're using. I do want to, now that I'm on full video, show you like a large paintbrush you may see in a craft store. But the ability for you to hold this at a 45-degree angle with that really sharp point allows you to make very large brush strokes and very large letters. So just like the small marker that I showed you, just like this larger marker that I was writing with before, it just almost quadruples the size of the lines that you're able to make, which can be really fun. I recommend using larger tools first and probably holding the tool closer to the point. It allows you to have more control over the marker as you're using it. It allows you to pull along the paper or the wall or whatever you're writing on. And once again, holding it at that 45-degree angle as you pull down those strokes. Usually, I know a sign painting term is pull your lines and push your arcs. So it kind of helps to get your hand conditioned to pulling down those lines and making those letters. I'm going to share my screen again. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so it'll go in just a second. And let me know if you can see that. Sorry, just 1 minute. And if it doesn't go for some reason, you'll just get to see me and I'll get to keep presenting. Ah, there we go. Okay, so now looking back at this example that I was showing you before, you can see the hand on top has that 45-degree angle, right? You can see up on the right-hand side some illuminated manuscript page with that very boxy lettering. And you can see the ways that this example page is telling you how to create your letters. You can see the shape of that O is basically the same shape as that G, just without the additions. The shape of that M is very similar to the shape of that N. So once you understand the strokes, the widths of the strokes, the way to create those strokes, you're really able to create any letter of the alphabet, which is a lot of fun. I do want to go to the next. Once again, thinking this is a visualization of what I was speaking about earlier. This is the traditional way of doing things. Once again, the fun part of calligraffiti is that you do not have to follow these guidelines. It might be helpful as you're first learning, but then feel free to break those rules, right? You can see there's one complete nib width between each of the letters in this word quick. And once again, that's 8 pen widths in height and bottom with those ascenders and descenders. I think it's very good if you want to be legible, but once again, you don't always have to be, which I think is really fun. Here is you may have seen this phrase before. It uses every letter in the English alphabet, in the Roman alphabet, the English language, whichever one you say. So I just want to show how similar a lot of these letters look, and it's up to you to break these rules, and that's what's so fun about it. So the letters that are the same height here are the letters A, C, E, I, M, N, O, R, as you can see, the S, U, V, W, and Z. The others have ascenders or descenders that put them a little bit apart, but those are all the same height throughout. So starting with those vertical strokes lets you really practice what's going to make up the letters. I mean, as you can see, hopefully, if you look at the I in quick, 3 of those connecting to each other creates the M in jump. So it just shows, handwriting can be hard, and it might be difficult to start to, practice this. But once you really get those strokes down, you can start playing around adding those different pressures like we were talking about earlier, really trying your best to play around with the letter forms and stylize them in a specific way. I really like the A's in this one because it is very different than the A that I showed you when I was drawing on the board behind me. If you look at the A in lazy, the creator of this example would have first done the shorter left side of the A, starting about halfway, pulling that down, and then crossing it with that serif going from left to right. Then they would have done the second part of the A, which is that tall part, that stalk. They would have went to the height and pulled down and then finished with another serif to give it that body. And then the third would be actually taking the marker, swinging upwards for that thin part, so using the very tip of their broad edge, connecting to the top, and then doing a larger serif across. I really love the D as well. It has a lot of, I don't know, potential, a lot of spike to it. Graffiti writers and calligraphers similarly can talk about letters that they like more than others. I really love E's, and I think the letter Z is also so much fun. Z's and S's, because they have so much movement to them. Letters like M and U and I are a little bit harder. They're more rigid in their structure. So any letter that you can really play around with, I've always found very fun. Going to the next, I do want to show, because I haven't showed too many of these, examples of the uppercase alphabets of black letter. So this is a fractal uppercase alphabet, fractal being a type of black letter. Once again, I highly recommend practicing lowercase first. Oh, okay, I'm seeing a comment in the chat. Yeah, so it is difficult. But the fun thing is, you can really practice from anywhere. You can practice in your home. I practice in airports. As long as you have a pen and that is slightly broad, or even, like I'll show you in a minute, those 2 pencils technique, you can make the letters. And once again, you can see with these uppercases, the strokes have that same width to them, that same change from the skinny 45 to pulling into that large, full, broad stroke. I really like, you can see the E's and the G's and the O's have a very similar shape, a similar body to them coming down with that pen stroke. And once again, some of the letters are extremely similar when you look at, the shape of that U compared to the V or the W for that matter. So very stylized, very, very different type of black letter than the more rigid one that I was just showing you. But I do want to show you that as well. So here's something that is more rigid. You can see, it's still, once again, extremely stylized, but it has that uniformity. It has that kind of what we think of like an old-fashioned approach. I will demonstrate behind me in 1 second just how to make one of these. If anyone in the chat wants me to do a specific letter or write a specific word, I'd be happy to. But I could write word, speech, and life, for example, or something else. But I do want to show you kind of what goes into creating one of these uppercase letters. But always remember, lowercase is a great place to practice first, and then you can start playing around with these uppercase letters. There's so many resources online as well, and I highly recommend once libraries are open, if you can go to the library, there's always incredible resources. There's never been a better time to practice calligraphy, especially considering that this art form for hundreds of years was very walled off from the general public. Thinking about when black letter and Gothic calligraphy was first used more prominently, most of the population in those areas were unable to read or write. And I think it can be debilitating and often off-putting, similarly how you might look at a graffiti tag and say, what is that? I could never do that. I can't read that. It's I'm an outsider. There's never been a better time for you to jump into these types of art. And obviously, Word, Speeds, and Life has plenty of classes and programming that allow you to do so, which is fantastic. But there are also other ways online that can help you get started. So I will show you right now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen once again, and I'll jump back to it for the last couple slides in just a few minutes. We've got about 12 minutes left. On this page that I've been showing you so far, I'm going to show you why it's important to use this double pencil. So I use mechanical pencils so I don't have to sharpen them, and they can always be a similar, okay, I'm getting a couple comments as well. I will do an M in a minute, so thank you. You know, I'll start like this. So I've clicked the erasers. I've got, if I can find the camera, I've got my points here. So when I do this, I'm going to touch both points to the paper at the exact same time. I'm doing this so I can show closer. If I pull down at the same time with these lines, they're perpendicular, right? They won't touch. And you can see it's very similar to the stroke on the top of the page. So then if I connect these two lines that I just made with the pencil, I get an extremely similar shape to what it looked like when I had used a full-bodied marker, right? So if I filled this in, and I'll do it very quickly with the pencil, you know, I would get that shape of that letter. It's the exact same thing. I like doing this because you could fill in the letters when you're drawing them with any design or pattern or color that you want to. So I will quickly show you how to do, let's go with a stylized M. So the first thing I'm going to do is do my first leg of the M. If you think about an M traditionally like this, as you can see on top of the screen, I'm going to do this first part here. So I'm going to take my pen, I'm going to pull down like that, and then I'm going to connect the two lines to each other. So I'm going to connect and connect. So now I have my starting line, my first leg of the M. Now I'm going to do a serif coming off to the right-hand side so I can create that second stalk of the M. Like that. And once again, I'm going to connect the two lines together once I pull my hand away. That's what gives it that shape instead of it just being two lines that are next to each other. So now I have something that looks like that, almost like the beginning of a lowercase f. From there, I'm going to do exactly what I did in the beginning, which is pull this straight down. So now I have two legs of an M, and I'm going to connect, once again, the two lines to one another and repeat the first motion that I did over here. So I'm going to do another serif going this way, connect the line, pull down, connect the line. So now I have an uppercase M starting to form. It's tough. You know, it takes a little bit of time, but I will add a couple more things to this to make it look more like an M. I'm going to add another little flourish, another little serif here. I'm going to add one on this side as well. And then here, I'm going to add something that differentiates this line from the two middle lines. I'm going to add a longer serif connecting here, and maybe a small one here. I'm doing this holding up the paper, but you can see that kind of looks like an M. And then the fun part about this is you can start outlining or highlighting those strokes. So I'm going to use a Sharpie now. I'm going to trace over my lines and show you what this would look like. So just give me 1 second as I do that. That's the fun use of that pencil technique. It allows you to create the skeletons of your letters. And then if you outline them, or if you want to fill it in with a very specific color or something along those lines, it isn't as permanent as doing it with one marker. You're able to erase, you're able to go back over your lines, and you're able to have a little fun with it. That's what's so great about calligraphy and graffiti in general is, you know, it is a very text-based art form. And going back to the illustrations that I showed you earlier, some of the murals that I painted, you can choose the words that you write. You know, thinking back to those Arab Spring examples, you can choose what you want to convey through your artwork. So here I've outlined that M. It is a little bit out of proportion, but I am very happy because I was holding it up against the air while doing it. But now the fun part is, you know, you can color that in, right? It doesn't have to be just a red or a black line like these marker tops up here. You can fill that in. You can take another marker, for example, and I could color this, you know, however I want. You know, I think it's great. These techniques of using the two, you know, pencils together, this can allow you to make the basic bars, let's say, in creating graffiti letters. You can create signs. I've created a lot of protest signs recently using these techniques. I'm going pretty quickly in coloring this, so it is a little bit outside the lines, but an example of an uppercase M. So there you go. We got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to share my screen one last time to show you a few last slides. But I really appreciate everyone for joining, and I hope that you can take away from this that it may look intimidating, it may look tough, but with practice and with I can't even say the right tools, but with some tools, you can really get into this art form. You can really start to practice and write. I haven't bought a birthday card or a holiday card in years because I just, I get a piece of paper and I write it all out. So I wanted to show you this piece by Shu, that calligrapher that I was going back to earlier, the one who is often cited or credited with the term calligraffiti. But what they did here is what he sketched out traditional graffiti letters. I say traditional because they're a little bit wild. You can see the H connecting into the O. You can see the E has that kind of structure to it with pieces breaking off. And instead of filling this in with spray paint or adding a 3D effect or a wild style effect, he filled the letter structure in with those simple strokes that we were talking about earlier, pulling down the lines and using those strokes then to create the letter form, which I think is really awesome. You can see that he wrote some phrases on the right-hand side as well. I see the word brush, I see the word shore, shoe, and chow, it looks like. And I just think it's fantastic. You can see the splatter that was thrown on the wall, the attention to detail, but then also the aggressiveness, almost the randomness in the strokes of some regard, the flourishes that come off, the splatter, all of that. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I think if this is the first online session that you've attended with Words, Beats, and Life, they put on such incredible programming, whether it's graffiti or, thankfully today, calligraffiti, breakdancing, other types of dance, poetry, chess, emceeing, b-boying, DJing, you name it. And I'm just very thankful, one, to work with the organization for so long, and two, that they offer these types of classes to experts and artists and people who are new to these art forms. So thank you so much for taking a chance and joining today's session and learning a little bit about this art form that you may not have been as familiar with before. And with that said, I want to leave you with some assignments, some homework. If you don't take them, that's great. But I think it's important, and something that I've heard Mozzie say a lot is each one teach one, right? And I think that when people reach a point where they're comfortable in their art form, or even if they're not, I think the ability to express that love for it and to introduce it to other people is extremely important. So I want to leave you with practice makes perfect. It can look intimidating, it can look scary, especially when calligraphy is so deeply rooted in these traditions of structure and writing letters a very specific way. But I don't think you have to do that. And I think that's why calligraffiti has really been so interesting to me, is because you can mix and you can take from and you can play with those very traditional structures that people have spent hundreds of years perfecting, and you can throw your own spin on it. The tag that's behind that assignment is by a graffiti writer named Shore, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But you can see the S-U-R-E and R. He wrote Sure, a different way of writing his graffiti name. And the style, and you can see that the way that his marker was touching the paper in those 45-degree angles, like we were saying, you can see that he used that serif motion, those little diamonds off to the side, almost like quotation marks around the name. I just think that's really interesting and unique. And the two examples on your right-hand side are placing abstract calligraphy strokes in a shape. So thinking back to the shoe example, right, of placing calligraphy, outside of just a written word, a straight line, thinking back to that outline of, a stroke has to be exactly this width or exactly this height. You're breaking away from that. It's abstract. You're filling in a space with letters and phrases and designs. So there are lots of ways to play around with this art form, lots of ways to get involved. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Mazi or anyone else at Words Beats in Life. Happy to send additional resources, and please, please, please make a donation to Words Beats in Life if you can. It keeps arts programming and hip hop programming in the DMV and honestly globally. They've gone all over. I believe you might be able to see the ticker on the bottom. They're pretty close to reaching one of their goals of donations for this week. So I highly recommend getting on there and making even a small donation would be really great. And thank you once again for joining us. I'll stick around for a little bit, but if you have any comments, any questions, anything along those lines, feel free to write them into the chat and I can address those. Thanks so much for joining. This was a blast. I also got to show off my cool gallery wall behind me that has a lot of different artwork from graffiti writers and street artists that I respect. So it's always fun when I get to show that. So you can see some tags. Nope, that side. Yeah.